Alright, so this video is about how to compose multiple web applications with Docker. I'm pretty sure since you found this video, you've heard of Docker Compose. So right here I'm on their website, and it's basically for running multiple containers in a Docker application. In this video, I'm actually talking about multiple web apps, not apps in general, but web apps, because that can be a little bit of a pain. So I set up an example here. I'm going to show you. Basically, why I'm doing this video is because I was actually Googling for quite a while now, like all kinds of stuff, tutorials on how to compose multiple web apps in a Docker Compose environment, and I didn't found any, so I figured why not do it myself now that I found it out and wasted a couple of hours. So maybe that helps someone. So basically, I've set up the multiple web apps on this host here. So if I go to localhost 81, there's one web app. It's just the Docker Cloud example Hello World web app, but it shows me the host of the Docker container, which is CFB2. Now, as you see, I use the port 81. Now, my second web app actually runs on localhost 82. And here we see a different host name. So going back to the other one, here's this host name, CFB, here's this host name, FFE. And the only difference here is a different port. Now, given the scenario that you have really many web applications with different ports, like I'm coming from an example with 5 different web applications that all have different ports, I actually don't want the user to enter the port all the time. I mostly want neat URLs, and that's why I created something that gives me the possibility to just have a path name here like web1 and still get the exact same result. So that you believe me, let me input that in a new tab. So it actually loaded the site again, and same if I input web2. So it gave me the same web app, but this time with a path. And I actually did it with HAProxy or HAProxy or whatnot. So let me walk you through. We need some files for that. Let's start with the Docker Compose, which just fires up multiple web apps and the HAProxy. So let's create a Docker Compose.yml. This is basically the recipe on how to fire up the services. So we need a version here. Let's do 3 because we need some commands that only work in versions 3. So we need to define different services, one of which being web1, as you've seen, and we want it to be based on the image Docker Cloud / hello -world, and the container name underscore name will be web1. Of course, we need to expose the ports here, so we'll do that by ports. And this is the app running on 81. Inside the container, it's obviously 80, so that's why 81 is routed through 80. So now we want the same service again, just for demo reasons. So this one we call web2, everything else is the same, name also going to be different. Alright, so this already fires up 2 web applications with the Hello World container from the Docker Cloud, one with 81 and one with 82. So now the third service, of course, will be HAProxy. We're gonna build our own one here actually, because we need to do some custom configurations, so we can't just pull the image. So we're gonna build from a directory called HAProxy, which we are gonna create. Here we need a space. And the container name will be HAProxy, just because it's easy. And the ports that we're gonna expose will be 80. So basically, if a user just enters our URL or local host or whatever, they're gonna be forwarded to 80, and this container here will do all the work and forward our web request to the other containers. So this is basically our Docker Compose file. Now, as we declared here, we need a directory called HAProxy. So let's create that. HAProxy. Inside this, we need definitely a Docker file. And also, as I said, we need to do some custom configurations. We're gonna create haproxy.config. haproxy.config looks good. All right, so let's go into the Docker file. That's pretty easy because we just start from the official HAProxy Docker file. HAProxy. We're gonna use version 1.7. So this is just, you can go to the official Docker Hub to see the documentation for it, or if you just Google it on Docker HAProxy, basically going to be the first site. So here you have all kinds of information about this image, but we're gonna copy our own configuration file in here. So haproxy.config, and we're gonna copy it to the path where the Docker image expects the config file to be, and that is in usr local etc haproxy haproxy.config. Okay, let's save this file. This is basically our Docker file, so we're done with that. Now we just, of course, need to generate or to fill haproxy.config, and that's where things get interesting, because it's actually not that easy to figure that out. So every haproxy.config file has a global section, but we don't need anything in there for now, so we just leave it empty. It has a defaults section, and here we're gonna define some defaults. First of all, mode needs to be HTTP. You actually need that. If you don't have it, it won't work. Then we need to add timeouts, but that's needed by every proxy configuration. So timeout for the connect will be 5,000 milliseconds. That's just made up numbers. You can type here, whatever. But you're gonna need the timeout variables for connect client, 5,000 milliseconds, and timeout for the server, also 5 seconds basically. All right, now every haproxy.config file has different front ends and back ends that you can define. So as a front end, we just define basically every web request that's going to be for port 80. So let's define a front, and you can give it a name, whatever. I'll just call it HTTP in. And here we're going to bind all, and we do that with a wildcard, all port 80s. So basically here can come anything and then a port 80. So basically if you type in any URL in your web browser, it already sends the port 80. So that's basically everything that's connected to your URL. It's gonna have the port 80 and gonna be caught here in our HTTP in proxy. Now we gotta need some rules, because now we actually want to catch if the user inputs /web1 or /web2. So we're gonna use here these ACLs, and we give the ACL a name. Like in this case, for instance, you can come up with your own name, but I'm just gonna call it has web1. And then here are predefined rules that you can use from HAProxy. They have a documentation, so there you can find these rules. I'm going to use path underscore beg for begin, and if my path begins with web1, we want to fire this has web1 ACL. And of course, we're going to need another one for web2 in this case. So you're going to basically need one ACL for every path that you want to configure. And then next thing is that we want to forward if one of these ACL fires to a backend, to a specific backend. So this is done by use backend. Then you give the backend a name. So I'm just gonna call it the same so it won't get too confusing. If has web1 fires. And again, the exact same thing for web2. Pretty easy. And then we're gonna need a default backend. Just if things fail or whatever, like the user could import any other path. Here it doesn't really matter, we're just gonna forward it to web1, so that at least something will happen. All right, this is basically the definition for our front end. Now we need the backends, and we already defined two backends, or not we defined, but we reference to two backends, so now we're gonna define them. Backend web1. And here we're gonna need the server web1. Here you also have a name. It can be different, but I just give it the same. So everything correlated to web1 will be web1. And then I'm actually gonna forward it to the Docker container. And the cool thing about Docker Compose is that inside the Docker Compose environment, we have full host names with the service name. So if I go back to the Docker Compose, you probably remember that I gave the container name and the service name. So it's basically the service name, which is my host. So if you give it a name, it will have the host, and from it within this container, you can basically ping web1 or ping web2, and you're gonna be connected to those. And of course, within our world inside Docker Compose, it still has port 80 and port 80, even if we exposed port 82 and port 81. So this is why here we still need port 80. And this is the Docker container host. So we of course need the same thing again for web2. And then we actually need something else. It kind of depends on your specific configuration, but in my one, I needed this. Basically now, if I refer to, for instance, localhost /web1 or localhost /web2, yes, it forwards me to port 80, which is good, of host web1. So I'm actually gonna get the web interface of this web app, and here I'm gonna get the web interface of this web app. So that's pretty cool. But what still will be the case is that I will have the path web1. And you know what? Why not just start it like this and show you what I mean, and later we're gonna fix it. So bear with me here. Now, of course, we need to start Docker. So let me actually cd into desktop, Docker load. This is where I have my stuff. So here we're just gonna fire up the whole thing. Actually, we would need to cancel the old one where I showed you the demo. Because otherwise we'll have too much in port 80. That won't be good. All right, so here we are in our directory. We have our Docker Compose and the HAProxy that we just generated. Now let's fire up the whole thing. Docker Compose up, and of course we want to build because we have our own build. If you remember, we want to build our HAProxy, and you just do that with the build flag. All right, so it should fire up if we don't have an error, but we do. You mean ports? Yes, I actually do mean ports here. All right. So thanks for the help, Docker Compose. Docker Compose is pretty good when it comes to this kind of debugging. And there we go. It's firing up, but it exited. So we have another error. And this is back end. Yeah. Okay, probably you guys saw this while I was typing. And we're like, oh no. But now let's see if we have another. Of course, now we need to shut it down. Docker Compose down because the web 1 and 2 already were running. But there we go. Fire it back up. Now all the 3 are running. Let's see if HAProxy exits again. No, it doesn't. It stays open. All right. So if we actually see a Docker ps-a, we get our 3 containers here. I just started them, so they have port 80, 81, and 82. So let's go back to our web front end. If I type in localhost now, it's gonna give me a container and of course container 1, because this was our default. So cd85 should be web 1 cd85. So this is it. And of course I get the same one if I import. Oh, sorry. It's still the default because it doesn't know web, but it knows web 1, and this is still 1. But now if I input web 2, it should change. This number here should change. So watch it, and it changed. 640, and this is this one 640, which is web 2. So yay, it worked. But as you see here in our log, let me actually do that a little wider. It's always has been forwarded to /web and /web1, even if we don't want that, of course, because maybe our web app doesn't know the path web 1 or web 2. So let's say you have your own Flask server. This path will be forwarded to your Flask server, and if you don't have this path there, but maybe you just have a slash or just your entry point, then you want to replace the web 1 because it's not needed anymore after the point where you actually forwarded it. And yeah, since it took me a while to figure that out, I also want to show you, for all the people who have enough seen, they can check out now. But I actually want to explain how I did that, and you can actually do that with a command in the backend called rec rep. So basically it replaces the request replace, and you can input your regular expressions here. And you know what, I'm cheating anyway, probably you have noticed, but this I'm just gonna copy and paste because it's a bit long. I've linked the GitHub in the description down below, so just go ahead and download your own version, so you're gonna have the whole thing, or you can just pause and type it yourself. So here, I'm just going to explain the whole thing. Here we have a parenthesis, and here we have a parenthesis. And parenthesis in regex, who doesn't know, always means a group. So basically, we have a group, everything that comes before web1, then we might or might have not a slash. In this case, we don't, but we might. So this is indexed, yeah, this is shown by the question mark. And then anything else can come in this request. Basically, what we are going to do is we don't want the web1 in there. So we just want anything before and behind. So basically, the web1 and web2 only should be used in this proxy thing here. So we just want to replace that. And that's being done by just putting group 1 and group 2 together. So after the replacement, we have everything but web1, and if there's a slash, also without the slash. So that works pretty well. I'm just gonna copy and paste the same thing to web2, and of course we need to replace this right here. So if you just have like a long list, you could also do this as a regex, but in my case it's just different names, so I'm gonna use the full name here. So I'm gonna show you what changed from earlier, so therefore we need to restart the whole thing. Shut it down and fire it back up again. So now we can just reload the old pages. Let me do web2 once. So of course the ID changed, as you saw. Web1 again, so it changed again here. If I go back to the console, you're gonna notice here in my request, it actually only has a slash now, and that's what we want. It has a slash here and a slash there. Let me just input here something completely random, and now it just defaults to 1, which is still 3DE and so on, but it didn't replace it. So in this Docker Cloud Hello World example, it's pretty tolerant, so it's just gonna accept anything. But probably you're gonna have a web app that doesn't recognize the path or whatnot. So since we use the web1 and web2 in the path only to forward it to the right location, we're actually gonna want to replace it, and that's being done by this neat little regex here. So yeah, this was the small example. Feel free to follow along, post your questions down in the description or on GitHub. Yeah, this is just my first tutorial here because I was looking so long for the solution.